So, is resin 3D printing miniatures really worth all the hassle and hoops you've got to jump through? Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss that. So I've been resin 3D printing now for about 2 years. So I run a YouTube channel all about it, and I've done an absolute ton of resin 3D printed miniatures. So I've seen it thrown around absolutely loads lately on the internet about whether or not people should get a resin 3D printer. It's going to be worth it for 3D printing miniatures and all of that. And obviously that's caused by a number of things. Resin 3D printers are so much cheaper now, they're easier to pick up, there's so many more guides out there, and there are some absolutely incredible sculpts and creators that are making 3D printed miniatures for the tabletop. Also, it doesn't help that some of the big name brands that are out there just aren't able to keep up with the demand, so getting hold of certain stock is a little bit difficult. So obviously that's going to bring more and more people into the hobby, which is fantastic, but it does have some absolutely incredible pros, and it has some really big pitfalls and cons as well to be aware of. So first up, let's talk about the pros of 3D printing, why you might want to consider it, and why it is a fun and worthwhile thing to do. The first thing is that there are so many things to choose from. So depending on the kind of thing that you're into and what you want to be able to print off and paint and play with, there's just pretty much endless opportunities. There are more and more creators coming to the market all the time, and some of the stuff is just absolutely beautiful. Also, combined with that choice and what you've got available to you, you can also scale things up and down as well. So currently I've been really into battle tech, so I want to print off loads of soldiers and tanks, everything to go with that. And I can take all of my standard 28mm or 32mm models and shrink them down in a slicer, so that way they all play nice with that like 6 or 8mm scale. I've also done videos in the past that you can find on the channel where I've shrunk things down to a 15mm scale. And obviously as well you can do vice versa, so you can take something that's a really small scale and scale it up so that way it fits on the tabletop. So depending on how big or small you want to play, you can do that. So the next big pro is that it's cheaper than ever to get into the hobby. 3D printing costs have obviously been coming down, the quality has been getting better, we're now onto things like 12K resolution screens, which is absolutely like mind-blowing. And to get hold of these machines, it's so much easier. You just go onto somewhere like Amazon and literally next day with Prime, you can have them on your doorstep and you are pretty much ready to go from that point. Along with the fact that it's now cheaper, there are more and more user guides out there, more and more people doing it, and the community is growing. And the great thing is the community is incredibly helpful. So if you're ever stuck with something, it's pretty easy to find a resin 3D printing group that will help you out with that. As well as those printers getting cheaper, they're becoming much better quality, and also as well they're becoming much easier to use. There are more safety features coming out for all of these resin 3D printers, although not enough for my liking, and we'll come on to that later. So the entire setup is easier to get hold of and put together. And with the cheapness of the machines, the hobby is cheaper to a certain extent. I've done videos in the past where I've shown how many miniatures you can print off with like just one bottle of resin, and it's a surprising amount that you can get out there. Compared to buying a box set from somewhere like Games Workshop, for example, you could be saving yourself a small fortune, but it all comes down to what you want to play with. The next pro for miniature tabletop at least is that resin is getting better in terms of its quality, and most importantly, its durability. Resin always has that disadvantage of being more brittle in comparison to just your normal miniatures that you'd buy from someone like Games Workshop or any of the other big name brands. However, this year I have tested some out that have been surprisingly durable, and although they're not as durable as some of the big name plastic brands, they are incredibly durable and have really blown my socks off. The big one that stands out to me is the Jamhe Art Engineering resin. It's a little bit more expensive than standard stuff I've been using in the past, but it is well and truly worth it. And there are plenty of other resins out there that I haven't tried yet, and I'm sure if you look around you'll be able to find those. And the last big pro I want to talk about is just the fact it's a lot of fun. It's a really interesting hobby that adds so much more to your tabletop experience. You've got that ability to be able to go off and print some terrain or be able to print off some miniatures, but more and more you just see that it goes from this digital format, you figure out how it all works, and then literally within a day you can have some miniatures there and ready to go. It's just a fun hobby to play around with. There's a lot of tinkering to do, but once you get used to it, I've had a lot of fun with this. However, moving on to the cons, and there are a surprising amount of them, and they don't always get talked about a lot when it comes to resin 3D printing. And especially for anybody who watches channels like this, for example, you see the miniatures kind of go into a slicer, get printed off, and then the next thing you know, we put them together, we're painting them, and then they're on the tabletop. It's not all butterflies and sunshine and all of that. There's a lot of stuff that goes in the background of a resin 3D printer that doesn't always come into consideration. So the first one is, it takes up a lot of space. And when I say a lot of space, it really does. It's not just the printer that you've got to find space for. You've got to find space for the printer. You then need something like a slap mat, which I use to kind of collect all the resin and put the miniatures onto. When it comes to resin 3D printing, you also need to clean up all of those prints. So you're going to need somewhere to do that. So whether or not that's a tub of IPA or whether or not you get something like a wash and cure station. And then if you have a wash and cure station, that also needs to have some space as well. You then need space for all of your resin, you need space for all of your cleaning stuff, you need space for all of your tools that you're going to use it. So your scraper, for example, all the Allen keys that you've got to store somewhere, all your spare FEPs that you're potentially going to need as well. So resin 3D printing really does take up a lot of space. And whilst we're on the subject of space, we'll move slightly into safety as well. And when it comes to resin 3D printing, it's not just the physical space that the printer requires, it's also the space it takes up because of the fumes that it gives off. Ideally, you don't want to be in the same room as your resin 3D printer, and that's because ultimately resin is toxic and it will give off fumes as it cures. So even if you have great ventilation, or if you have like an air purifier and stuff like that, you probably want to put safety first and not spend too much time around your resin 3D printing, which means you might end up losing a room or you need to have a dedicated space to put it. Now I've alleviated a lot of that by putting it into a grow tent, so pretty much all of my resin 3D printing is there. But obviously I'm lucky and I have that space to be able to put my resin 3D printers, and that's not going to be available to so many people. And let's move sideways into that full safety bit. And like I mentioned, you don't want to be around those fumes. Messing around with the resin is always a pain. You've always got to have your gloves, you've got to make sure you have your mask, you want to make sure you have something to cover up your eyes as well, because you do not want to get resin into your eyes, and there's just so many aspects there. If you get resin onto your skin, you might not notice anything at first, and that will then cause people to become a little bit lax and careless around it, because, well, it didn't burn me then, it's not going to have any effect on me in the future. But over time, you'll become more and more allergic, and you have larger reactions to resin, so it's just something to bear in mind. You don't want to be getting this on your skin, you don't want to be breathing it in. And ultimately, this thing's been a consumer hobby for not a massive amount of time, so we don't have enough in terms of studies and everything else that go into it. The next big con is it's really messy. Like, it's really, really messy. I have a slap mat down, I have to use alcohol to make sure I get everything cleaned up, and even when everything's in these grow tents, it's in a separate space, it's just really messy. And that's kind of it. You just have to make sure you're cleaning it up all the time, and curing any spilled resin is just a bit of a pain. The next thing is it can get very, very expensive. And I know I talked about it potentially being cheaper, and it really depends. But once you get into 3D printing, depending on who you are and what your mindset's like and everything else, you can really fall down the rabbit hole of just subscribing to loads of different Patreons or buying loads of digital files. And then bear in mind as well that you've got to buy the resin and all the bottles of resin and everything else. You've also got to make sure that you buy all the alcohol to store the cleaning and everything with. You've got to buy replacement FEPs. You've got to buy replacement gloves as well. All of these different bits that are consumables for your resin 3D printer that no one ever really talks about, it all starts to add up in the background. Another big cost that no one really talks about is the fact that you've got to make sure that your resin remains at a good temperature. So in my grow tent, I've got a little heater, and it's not too bad. It's a 500 watt heater, so that's the maximum it ever runs at. And it doesn't run at that all the time, but I've got to have that turned on when I'm doing my 3D printing, because obviously it gets cold in the UK, and if the temperature drops, then I'm just going to get absolutely loads of failed prints, and that's absolutely no good. But obviously I've got to pay for that electricity, and then that starts to add up. So resin 3D printing can very quickly become quite expensive. The next big con to consider is sometimes it's just like rolling a dice when it comes to resin 3D printing. You can get everything dialed in perfectly on your resin 3D printer, and then something just goes wrong for reasons, and there literally never seem to be any reasons. So then you've got to diagnose, what is it that's causing my print to fail? Is it falling off the build plate? Is it falling off the support? What's going on with it? And then you've got to figure out, is it my exposure times? Is it my lift speeds? Was my temperature incorrect? Is my FEP faulty and I need to replace that? And there's so many hoops you've then got to jump through to diagnose what's wrong with it. And my big problem with resin 3D printers that really kind of plays into this at the moment is they're all just a little bit dumb in the fact that they're just machines that basically do the printing process and they follow the instructions you give them. They don't diagnose anything. They don't know if something's going wrong. They don't know something's in your vat, for example, that it's just going to crush it through the screen. So you've then got to jump through all these hoops, and sometimes it can be an absolute pain. And I know that there are people within my Discord community, for example, that talked about this, where there just doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason as to why the machine's going wrong. They've tried everything, and they just can't figure it out. And then one day it just works. And I've had the same as well with at least 2 of my machines, where they've just one day stopped printing. And I haven't changed any settings, the temperature hasn't changed, I've not used a different resin, but something's happened. So then I have to jump through all of those hoops, and it just doesn't make any sense sometimes. And it can be really, really frustrating and make you pull your hair out if you have any. So that's a really quick fire list of pros and cons for this argument. And there are all sorts of different other ones out there as well. I'd be really interested to know your thoughts in the comments below. What are some of your pros when it comes to resin 3D printing? What are some of the cons you've got when it comes to resin 3D printing? Throw them down there. And that way it just gives people who are maybe considering getting into resin 3D printing a little bit more information. Now, obviously, I run a channel about 3D printing, so that's one of the reasons why I'm massively into it. But I'm now at the stage where if I had to do it all again, I would potentially just get an FDM printer so I could do all my terrain and just buy my miniatures. I absolutely love the results I get from my Resin 3D printers. The quality is absolutely fantastic. You cannot argue with the quality anymore, although some people will do, I'm sure. But the quality that I see on my miniatures that I get from my Resin 3D printing is outstanding. I think it's some of the best I've ever seen in any miniatures, even compared to some of the big name brands. However, getting to that final print can often be a pain, and I sometimes hate it. There's a lot of times where I'll look and I'll go, I just don't want to print that. Even though I want those miniatures, I just don't want to go through the hassle of getting it all sliced up, getting it into the printer, and then getting it cleaned, and then getting it cured, and waiting around, and removing all the supports and all of that. Sometimes it just drives me crazy, so I don't. However, it is amazing having a Resin 3D printer. If you're considering getting one, as long as you've got the space and everything else, you do your research and you put that safety first, then they're well and truly worth giving a go. It's definitely not as easy as some people make it out to be. It's not just a case of buy a printer, pour some resin, get a file and go. There's so many other steps and hoops you've got to jump through, so it can be a pain. But if you've got the patience, and you're not printing as much as I am as well for a channel, for example, that's probably one of the reasons why it gets quite tedious, is because I'm constantly doing it on repeat. If you're just doing it every so often and you really like some of those minis, there's a lot to love about the hobby. So I hope that's given you some kind of insight into whether or not it's worthwhile getting a Resin 3D printing for your miniature tabletop gaming. So thanks for watching that video. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. And if you've got any questions about Resin 3D printing, by all means head on over to my Discord channel where we discuss things about 3D printing, tabletop gaming and painting. Stay safe and I'll see you soon. Bye.